Battered, sexually violated, and strangled to death, the remains of 16-year-old Carol Sue Klaber were found laying in a roadside ditch in northern Kentucky in June of 1976, and for a long time people had single question who was the monster behind such a callous act. And now, nearly 5 decades after her remains were discovered with the help of modern DNA technology, authorities finally have an answer to that question. Born to Daniel Henry Klaber and Betty Jane Reniker on November 28, 1959, Carol Sue Klaber was the youngest of 3 siblings. Described as a modest teenager, Carol was known to have a great sense of humor. Growing up, she had a long list of interests, but music seemed to be her favorite. At the age of 5, Carol started taking piano lessons and became so good at playing it that her teacher Hattie Shersman chose her to represent her students at the Ohio Music Teachers Association. A junior at Dixie Heights High School, Carol was a volunteer at St. Charles Nursing Home and had been a member of Girl Scout. At 5:30 p.m. on June 4, 1976, Carol, who had gone on a bike ride earlier that day, came back to her parents' forthright home, left her bike there, and told her family that she was going to have dinner with some of her friends at Zeno's Hyde Park restaurant. She then left her home and hopped into a car which, according to the witnesses, was a grey Chevrolet Monte Carlo. The car then drove off, and it was the last time that anyone saw the 16-year-old girl from Fort Wright alive. Next day, on June 5th, Dr. James Huey was on his way to work when he noticed something strange at the end of the road. He pulled over and got out of the car. Upon closer inspection, what revealed itself sent chills down his spine, and without any second thought, the dentist from Walton called the authorities, who arrived at the Chambers Road to find the battered remains of a girl laying in a ditch. Evidence at the site led investigators to believe that the murder had taken place at a different location, and body was moved to the site post-mortem. Authorities sent the body to the coroner's office, and an autopsy revealed that the victim died due to asphyxiation and blunt force injury to the head. The injuries on victim's body revealed that a struggle had ensued between her and the killer. There were signs of a sexual assault, and examiners were able to obtain the killer's DNA from her body and clothes. Thomas Klaber, who had now heard the news of a body being discovered in Boone County, was called in by the authorities, and with tears in his eyes, Thomas identified the remains to be those of his beloved sister, Carol Sue Klaber. Detectives began their investigation into the brutal murder of 16-year-old. They interviewed her family members, friends, and acquaintances. They eventually learned about the boy with whom Carol was last seen, and with the help of witnesses, they managed to have a sketch of him made. Detectives were now looking for the boy, but they were unable to find him, as every lead they investigated proved to be a dead end. Killer's DNA found on Carol's body and clothing couldn't be used, as DNA technology of the time wasn't advanced enough to find a perfect match, and could only be used to test against possible suspects, so it was preserved for future use. With time going by and no solid lead coming in, the case of Carol Sue Klaber, whose life was tragically cut short, went cold, and people started to believe that the name of the monster behind this act will never be known. Former police detective Jerry Keith, who worked at the case for decades, took it upon himself to solve the case and bring closure for the Klaber family. He worked tirelessly on the case, and developed theories which pointed to two known assailants as Carol's killer. Sadly, in 2017, the same year Boone County Sheriff's Office established its cold case unit, Keith died. But his efforts were for nothing as Detective Cox and Tim Adams investigated his theories. But in the end, DNA revealed that the two men Keith suspected to be Carol's murderer were innocent in this case. In 2022, investigators submitted the DNA samples to a company named Othram Inc., which specializes in genealogy testing, and within months the company were able to make a comprehensive DNA profile which ultimately led them to the killer, and 47 years after her murder, we finally know the man who was behind it. Thomas W. Dunaway was 19 years old at the time of Carol's murder. Thomas lived near Devou Park, which Carol frequently visited during her bike rides. Thomas and Carol attended the same school when they were young, and detectives believe that it was from there that the two got to know each other. Thomas drove a Chevrolet Monte Carlo and looked similar to the man in the sketch made in 1970s. 9 days after Carol's murder, Thomas enlisted in the US Army, and that same year, he murdered a man by the name of Ron Townsend and deserted his post in the army. Thomas was later arrested for the murder, and he pleaded guilty to the murder charge. The judge sentenced him into life imprisonment, but just 7 years after that, Thomas was out of prison. He died in December of 1990 without getting his comeuppance for the crimes he committed. The Sheriff's Office of Boone County requested for a posthumous indictment of Thomas, but their request was rejected by the prosecutor, who said that these type of trials require extraordinary circumstances, but he believes that if Thomas was still alive, he would not only be indicted but convicted of the murder. Detective Cox and Tim Adams later obtained a court order to exhume Dunaway's body, as they believed he is connected to other unsolved crimes in the area. Carol Sue Klaber now rests in Forest Lawn Memorial Park of Kentucky. For decades, her brutal and tragic end had tormented her family, especially her brother Thomas Klaber, who is still haunted by the memories of the event. Even though Thomas Dunaway will never pay for what he did, we hope Carol's family will finally have some closure, knowing the monster who took their beloved daughter away from them is no longer around and will not harm any other innocent soul. Thanks for being here. If you like this type of content, please like this video and leave a comment behind. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed so you're never gonna miss any of our future uploads. Stay tuned, stay curious.